MedStart.
It's kind of a long question.
I know, you go way back, but I won't go way back. I'll just start with what brought us to California, maybe. And first of all, I'm co-CEO of Seabright Ventures. Meg is the other co-CEO. She's the other half of it. We are married.
So she's the boss.
She's the boss. Right.
I know, I say the same thing.
Exactly. So I came to Sacramento in 2008 to build the West Coast operation for the Jackson Laboratory, which is a genetically engineered mouse provider. We built out on Raleigh Boulevard in sort of North Sacramento, 200,000 square foot, enormous, I think there were 25 vivariums. So that's where mice are bred and in clean room environments. So these were large, basically think of them as a class 1 fab, if you think about semiconductor technology. Or think, if you don't know semiconductors, think about an operating room. It's that kind of condition, and that's where genetically engineered, in particular, mice are bred, and out of that they get distributed all around the world. We would ship mice from this facility to pretty much every country in the U.S., in the world, as well as all over the U.S. So I came here to build and run that, did so, and then I took over international distribution, and I was with the Jackson Laboratory for about 10 years, and left at the end of that to do something called a search fund. A search fund is a little narrow section of private equity where you can raise a small pool of capital for an individual to go and acquire one business and run one business. So if you were to be what's called a searcher, investors would give you $500,000, you would take a very small salary, and you would go off and you would have 2 years to go find one business that had a certain set of characteristics to it, and then the investors would provide the capital to acquire that business if they wanted, if they wanted. And what happens actually is you basically have a 2-year interview for the job of CEO, and if they like what you find, they invest in it. If you don't find anything, or they don't want to invest, then they don't.
How did you even get into this? That's so different.
It's been going on. It was going on at a fairly low level. In other words, maybe in terms of amount invested annually by the investors, $50 to $100 million a year from throughout the 90s and early aughts. I got out of business school in 2002 and did an internship between my first and second year with one of the guys who was one of the early purveyors of the search fund investing model. Early years, it was really just Harvard Business School and Stanford. In other words, graduates from those programs would get handpicked and would go and do a search. The rules of search are basically and pretty much are still, you go out and you can pretty much buy anything you want, but it has to hit a certain number of buttons. It has to have recurring revenue, like real recurring, contractually recurring revenue, not project-based revenue. It has to be profitable, right? It has to have at least $1 million of EBITDA, maybe as much as $3 million. It has to be fairly not capital intensive and not R&D intensive, because those consume a lot of capital. And the EBITDA margin has to be generally north of about 15% or 20%. So what it ends up doing is it rules out a lot of businesses. It rules out retail stuff, it rules out distribution, it rules out manufacturing, but it ends up with a lot of software, a lot of B2B businesses. So if you can find one of those that has the right characteristics, and you can buy it for roughly 5 to 6 times EBITDA, then your investors will almost always invest in it if they feel comfortable with how you've handled yourself during your search period. So the search fund concept is really a bet on a person first as a future leader, and on the business second.
Oh.
So I left the Jackson Laboratory and raised that money, set off on my search, and was going to do a regional search within a couple hours of Sacramento so that I could stay home. I had 4 teenagers and a relatively new marriage. I wasn't going to get in the plane and go somewhere. We weren't going to pick up and move. We had 4 kids in high school. But I was going to buy something within about a 2-hour radius of Sacramento. And about 3 weeks into it, I met an old friend, a former customer of mine in San Diego. And one thing led to another, and I had to come home and talk to Meg and said, I've got a really good idea. I found the business. I think this is the one we want to buy. It's in San Diego. And I still can remember her face on that. And it happened actually pretty quickly. It's a 2-year search. We were working on our deal together. It's 2 years you have to search, but this was within a month of me beginning. It's very quick. Generally, people get some practice. They do a few deals. They fail on a few deals before they really find their deal. And I stumbled into one I really liked very quickly. And it turned out it was in exactly the same space I had just come from. It was a former customer. And so I have one right here. Thank you, love. And ordinarily, I had actually written up my investment documents that said we could end up in any industry except for biotech or biotech services. And this was squarely in biotech services, preclinical in vivo pharmacology. And I still tell that to new searchers because there was something about this business that was different than a normal preclinical in vivo CRO, which was, it was the leader in this, at the time, what they called contract vivariums. And it was an idea that had occurred to me previously, but I hadn't really done anything with it. Contract vivariums are basically shared workspaces, like this, right? So if you were to walk into one of our facilities, you would see a long hallway and a room, each of which was about 300 square feet. And in those rooms would be mouse racks, and a customer, a biotech, would come and rent one room and contract to take it for a year or 2 or 3 years, however long you wanted to get it, your price would obviously be lower on an annual basis. And so they had 5 of those locations in San Diego, 2 in San Francisco, and I saw that opportunity as holding some potential that made it more interesting to acquire than not. So that's what we bought. And the investors lined up behind it very quickly because they saw in me a relatively experienced senior manager. I'd run P&Ls before. It wasn't my first time around. And they saw me running something that I knew how to run, which is really rare in the search fund world. Usually you're the first-time CEO in a brand new industry. And in this case, neither of those was true. So investors were very comfortable making their allocation.
So how did you grew it from like seven spaces to like 20 some?
We had 7 when we started. And this is all, if you Google it, there's some podcasts out there, so I won't share anything I haven't shared before. We had about $10 million of revenue and about 25% EBITDA margins at the time. We paid about $15 million for the business. And we grew it to 25 locations, or on a 1-year forward basis, there would be 25 locations. Some of them are still under construction. When we sold it, basically 4 years later.
And what was the acquisition process like?
The acquisition process was pretty typical of search funds in that, as we were discussing, small businesses are often, like accounting is generally designed around managing cash and managing tax for even the profitable ones. And this is a good, profitable small business. And so when professional money comes in and looks at those numbers, they're like, this isn't sort of up to snuff. They're never audited numbers, right? They're barely even ever reviewed by an outside accountant. So there's often a clash of cultures and data and expectations there that kills a lot of deals. In this case, the CEO had done an exceptional job running his numbers. And so we were able to step into a set of QuickBooks that when he gave us access to it, or my accounting firm access to it to do the quality of earnings review, it was just like There were no adjustments. It was absolutely perfect. He had paid his taxes. He actually had chosen to pay taxes because he felt that would be, when he got around to selling it, a useful thing to have done to prove that there was actually cash flow there. And it was just a different way of doing it. And rarely is that the way it actually works, for good reason. So the acquisition process was actually quite easy. We had 90 days, and we closed.
Well, I was actually talking about when Charles River acquired.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That was also interesting too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for those of you running small businesses, keep clean books. And to the extent you're trying to save on taxes, realize there's trade-offs there that may or may not matter, but just know that there are trade-offs. Charles River was also in the same space. So there, by the way, Charles River was at the time a $10, $12 billion publicly traded strategic. I happen to know those guys because my prior life at the Jackson Laboratory, they distributed mice for me in some places around the world. So I had a fairly deep relationship with them. I knew they were interested in this vivarium piece of what we did. And so when we had 7 locations, at that time they had 3, I think. And so it became a bit of a race for me to make sure I was always the number one in the space. And I was always beating them and being a real pain in the ass. To sort of, in each new city, I was taking the lease that they wanted, or everywhere they went, they had to hear about us. And, so we would go to the J.P. Morgan conference in San Francisco every first week of January, and they would sit down and say, okay, are you ready yet? Are you ready yet? And I would say, I'm never ready, I'm never ready, I'm never ready. Eventually what happened, 3.5 years later, was it became clear that they really wanted to get into that space in a big way. And they were either going to get in by buying us or by crushing us. And they had the capital to do either. And the space we were in, building these vivariums, this space probably cost, I don't know, on a on a square foot basis, $200, maybe $150, $200 a square foot. Is that this space for office space? Does that sound right? Anybody here a real estate expert? Maybe
I remember overhearing that total price to build this thing was $50 million.
I don't know what that would mean on a square foot basis. Did you say 50 or 15? 50. That seems like a lot.
It sounds like a lot too.
On a commercial real estate, usually when you sign a lease, they give you some money to do some work, and usually it's $50 to $150 a square foot. A vivarium or an operating room or a fab is $500, $600, $700, $800, $1,000 a square foot to build that kind of space.
Oh.
And so, if you're in South San Francisco and you want to build a 500 square foot space, it could be $1 million just for 500 square feet, which is hard for many biotechs, as we were talking about. I have a former client here. And where was I going with that? I was.
So it is capital intensive.
It is. And so remember those 5 things I was talking about? You're often forgiven one of them if you can talk your way out of it, because it's hard to go 5 for 5. Capital intensity is one where if there's another source of financing other than equity, you can sometimes get away with it. It could be trade financing, it could be bank financing, it could be SaaS, lending. The key is the investors don't want their cash. They want it. They're worried about multiple of invested capital, MOIC. And you get a higher MOIC if it's somebody else's money. That's just sort of what it comes down to. In our case, what I was talking about, that landlord tenant improvement allowance, usually capped out at a couple $100 for most kinds of commercial real estate. In life sciences, in San Francisco and San Diego and Boston, they were providing $300 or $400 a square foot to their tenants because it was more expensive to build. And you think about that from a real estate landlord's perspective. They're basically lending their tenant capital. And here I come along and say, I got an idea, how about $800? Because I don't want to put that money in. We were able to turn the vivarium, from the landlord's perspective, into an amenity for their building, because they want to fill their building full of life science tenants, and they wanted to not build a vivarium on every floor. They really wanted just one vivarium, much easier for a range of reasons. And so they ended up providing the capital for us to grow. We probably, while we bought the business for $15 million with $10 million of equity, we probably got $100 million of growth capital through our leasing process, through our real estate leases. And so when we sold it 4 years later for $295 million, we didn't have any debt to pay off. We didn't borrow that from a bank, we didn't borrow it from lenders. The buyer had to step into our leases, which meant they took on our growth capital. And that's what led to a high MOIC. So the magic of that whole thing was providing a source of growth capital that was very equity efficient. And that's what led to very high returns for those investors.
All right.
Your investors must have been very happy.
They were really happy. Yeah. Particularly because from an IR perspective, within it was 3 years and 10 months. It was a 28x in less than 4 years. 3 years and 10 months.
So you don't want to do this again, and you went into investing?
It made my hair.
Oh, it was.
It was maybe Meg would probably tell the truth and say it was growing gray before that, but yeah. If I'd been 10 years younger, I probably might have had another one in me and done another search or something. I'm not a startup guy. I'm not that smart.
You're smart for not being a startup guy, actually.
I'm not that creative, let me put it that way. But I was pretty good at building a team that could do shit fast and that was motivated to sort of follow a script. And we weren't really inventing anything. That's the beautiful thing about search in particular is there's no R&D. Like the job, you go find a great business and then just do more of that. Either geographically, do more of that. Do that in San Francisco and San Diego. But don't do anything different. Just do more of the same thing. And it's just operationally easier. Or do it in this vertical and then take the same product and sell it in this vertical with a few tweaks and a different
It's kind of like a version of private equity in a way.
It is private equity. It's just a narrow slice of private equity in what we call the lower middle market. Generally, you're talking about businesses that never have more than 10, 15, $20 million of top line revenue.
Right.
And so, yes, now I've shifted to the investment side, and I invest in guys doing what I did, and just have a couple dozen of them out there running around, either running businesses or trying to find them.
Okay, so now we can talk about, we talked about your Explora Labs journey. Let's talk about Seabright Venture Fund. So tell us about Seabright.
Well, Seabright is just Meg and Sandy. There's no outside money. It's largely the proceeds of our share of that sale that we needed to do something with, and we invest it in search. A good chunk goes in search, and I oversee that. And then Meg oversees other sections of that capital allocation, including sort of clean tech and impact investing. You want to say anything more about that? No?
So you're looking for biotech and clean tech.
So generally, with respect to the search portfolio that I tend to oversee, Meg here isn't a lot about it because we share an office, but there's very little biotech. There's some biotech services, I guess is to say, but not so much the therapeutic creation. So in other words, we're invested in a CRO in the IVD side of the house. We're invested in we have a sort of a technical staffing firm that provides PhD level biostatisticians into clinical trials.
I like the picks and axes more.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly how we describe it. Picks and axes for the biotech and pharma services space. And generally, we can find, good recurring revenues, existing profitable businesses that with the right leadership can just keep doing more of it.
So are people coming to you, or are you like actively searching for
The
companies?
community that we're working in, again, I'll speak for myself with search, it's a very much a network and a community. And so everything comes through others. As well, you have all these searchers out there trying to raise search funds in order to be able to search, and they search you out, and they find you, because they're looking for somebody to take a small piece of, of their search capital. And so they find us. Meg is involved in a couple different ways that she finds her deal flow, through her relationships and network, and through some groups that she's invested in, like Tonic. Tonic is TONIIC, is a network of impact investors doing sort of cool things globally. So we are sort of as busy as we want to be. We don't have staff. It's just us. We have sort of a network of people who help us, with things like taxes and legal stuff, but for the most part. Generally, at least with search, we're taking a 5% of a cap table, not more. So there's always bigger people on the cap table who are people who I know really well, who are doing better diligence than I'm ever going to do myself. So in some ways you sort of pick and choose. And
So are you looking for like a lead investor already?
yes. I mean,
Okay.
sort of one of the rules is if I don't know the lead investor or a couple of the lead investors, I won't do the deal at all.
Okay.
Because there's just too much diligence to be done to get it right. And likewise, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, this one's really good, and I know that person well, and I trust their judgment, and we talk about it with, basic pattern recognition sort of stuff, we may do it even if we're not in the search. Sometimes we can do that. So.
Are you mostly relying on other investors, or do you talk to the people at the company as well?
Always talk to the people at the company. Yeah, I mean, in the end, we're just like when we are involved in the search directly, you're betting on the leader, the person. And if you get that wrong, you're screwed. If you get, as I did with Schumann, then you're screwed. And we both, I dodged a bullet that Christian dodged a bullet in essence that I took. and and that's $100,000. I would like to have back. Yes, but he learned something before I did about the leader of that organization, and that's it's an imperfect process, clearly.
So any success stories you could talk about so far?
Sure. Well, sort of, because it's early. The search fund investment process is a 8 to 12 year cycle. The investment, it's patient capital, it's a long process. In fact, many of the people will tell you they view it as what they call long-term hold money. They don't want it back. They would rather leave it there just because they're not investing for liquidity, they're investing for capital allocation for long-term compounding. That's what the primary LPs are looking for in that space. We've had a couple, we just, you get liquidity through two ways. Either somebody sells, which has happened, we've had that happen once. It was a SaaS business, and very quickly, 2.5 years later, a big strategic came in and rolled up that space, and they got rolled up, and we got out. In fact, in that case, I was very much against them selling. We're not seeking liquidity, we're seeking long-term compounding, and they delivered 2 or 3x to their investors very quickly, but like that's not the game we're in. We had a great business that was doing great, don't sell. That's a different issue. Actually, there was an interesting dynamic there because the controlling shareholders on that cap table were European, and for them, that was a no-brainer. You absolutely sell. And all the Americans were like, "What are we doing? This is what we want to own: long-term, compounding, high growth." And then Meg's, you've got a good one in Fervo, right?
Yeah, we got into a SPV on Fervo, which is probably, I think it's registered for an IPO, but it hasn't IPO'd yet.
That's
Geothermal.
geothermal
Advanced geothermal.
energy, right? So, but those are, we're not doing this for current income. We're doing this because we think it's a better place to park a portion of our assets than the public markets.
And talking to Meg, it seems like there's a social impact, or
Yeah.
That's what impact
Yeah,
investing
it's
is.
easier to do for me with the climate focus, because a climate focus sort of inherently has a double bottom line or impact investing lens to it than it is for Sandy, for you to do in your space, which is much more about those 5 key characteristics
Yep.
that you need to look for, kind of regardless of sector. And and they're smaller companies that are, they have less discretionary and strategic kind of optionality to deliberately make choices to do things with benefits in addition to shareholder value creation.
Right. The closest we come to it in search is being long-term patient capital, which does lead to different and I think generally more humane, often for the CEO's expectations, more humane expectations of a CEO than you might see in venture, for example.
so when you look at a company, what are things that you look for? And then on the flip side, what are red flags for you?
Well, the first thing and the second and the third thing is who's leading it, who's the CEO, and what is he or she made of, and who knows him or her well. That's the principal thing you're doing, because you're running a small business and you're doing something hard. You're stepping into a business you've never run before, and you've never been a CEO before. It's a crazy thing to think that you can actually pull this off, and that there's an industry in it that's delivered an IRR of 30% over 25 years. I mean, that's remarkable. So the only reason that happens is because you're picking extraordinary leaders before they've actually become that person. So we look at that. The second is a combination. I wouldn't say it's one. You're kind of looking for that combination of the magic 5 things. Profitable business, 3 years of profitable business. It has to be growing. It's not a turnaround. It has to generally, though not always, be capital light. But it doesn't need to be sexy. Some of the most successful businesses in search have been things like HVAC, residential HVAC. The big HVAC player here in Sac, you see all their... Bonnie was an early search acquisition, very successful, and that it's a tough business, but it's a classic example of what search funds buy. There's a bunch of things like that. What we call businesses that are perfect for search are what we call techs in trucks. So, and I still can't stop myself. Whenever I'm in a car, I see a van, one of those white vans, panel vans with, so-and-so's plumbing or electrical or, business services or whatever. The trades right now are hot. All the trades are getting acquired. A technician in a truck is a very good little business model people have figured out how to run and acquire. It's very easy to figure out what they're worth, and it's very eager to figure out what it costs to scale them up. And it's generally pretty capital efficient. Obviously, we look for cash generation, and you look for problems structurally. If it's something that has chronically long accounts receivable, like it does when you work for pharmaceutical companies, can be 90 days, 120 days sometimes. That's really hard. It's hard for working capital. It's hard as you're growing rapidly to have accounts receivable ballooning. And the working capital demands can be really hard. So that's the kind of thing that's a flag. But if it's like HVAC, where they actually pay you when you walk out the door, you can have a bit of a negative working capital cycle too sometimes. So you look for lots of different things, and it's never one thing. It's always a combination of things. If you were to whiteboard it, it's a bunch of things in the plus column and some things in the negative, and you ask yourself whether the CEO and the board that you wrap him or her with can handle the negatives. And what-
Okay.
What can they improve in the positives?
So I follow Big on Facebook. I see you guys sailing a lot.
Yeah,
So like, how do you manage the business when you're like sailing?
Starlink,
Starling.
yep. Yeah, we have a sailboat that we keep on the East Coast, and we spend about 6 months of our life on the sailboat. And I'm on 5 boards, Meg's on a few, and just a bunch of days, most days we're at a dock, or on a mooring, or on our anchor, and doing stuff, and we just say, okay, tomorrow morning we got to work, and so we work, and we can do email, we can do Zoom. We watched a football game 500 miles off North Carolina on our way from the Bahamas to Maine. Starlink is a ridiculously good enabler of irresponsible behavior. But that's the answer to that.
That sounds like a great life.
It's a good life. We're really, really lucky. We know it.
So I'm going to ask one question before I open up to the audience. Like, what advice do you have for early stage medical life science? I'm not really sure if that's, well, you were in that field for a while, so.
I mean, I think if I can point to the things that are always true of the successes, and almost always true of the failures, it's the people. And attracting the best people to your team as early as you can afford to, and it's almost never about money. That's proven to be a differentiator in the things I've seen. It's a challenge for Sacramento. I mean, we've all, like in various different ways, run across this here. We don't have the depth of pool that we have in San Francisco. There's always been this thing going on. Meg was involved in it. It's what her job was to overcome that, and yeah, and lots of people around here. So SAC has a challenge in that, and I think you have to be clear-eyed about that if you're doing it here. There are ways to do it hybrid, like work from home opens up a whole range of options. In ways that we never thought pre-COVID it would be possible to do. You can build a great team virtually, as long as you can work virtually. If you're in a wet lab, it's hard to do that virtually, and I would also say, just personally, when we look at teams, we do want them to be high performance, close teams, and there's some parts of that are very hard to do virtually. So I think you have to be sensitive of, as you turn each of those dials, which one you turn, and does it have an impact on something else you're trying to accomplish. And that's the art of management. That's why it's so damn hard.
All right. So with that, I'm going to open up questions to you all.
I got one. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail on the numbers. Right? Because you were talking about the multiples that are paid for the business and the $500,000 that might be paid for the search. The $500,000 for the search, is that then the person who's doing the search allocates that between salary expenses and other things, or how does that work?
Great question, yep. By the way, I'll give you an answer, but if you Google search funds or stick it into the cloud, you're going to get a great summary of all of this if you want to hear it again. Because it's unlike many other sections of venture, hedge, or private equity, Stanford has been tracking and publicizing search fund outcomes every other year for 20, 25 years. And they have a center of search funds, and there's an every other year report on search fund returns. And there's a lot of really good information there. So just to keep round numbers, and I'm going to continue to pick on Pavel, he raises $500,000 for his search from, call it 10 different people. Say it's 50, each one takes $50,000 chunks. Generally, it's not that way. Some people take a half a unit, some people might take 3, depending on what they want to do. But for the sake of Pavel's search, he's got 10 investors, each with a $50,000 position in his $500,000 fund. They each have 10%, right? And they get a 10%.
Firms like yourself or from independent, like angel investors or things like that?
So if I'm one of the investors, as I am now, in Pavel's fund, I would take a $50,000 position in his $500,000 fund. Yep. I would then have a right to a 10% pro rata right to the investment that he brings to me.
Okay.
So it's what I'm doing, and you might say, is I'm spending 50 grand for deal flow from him. If he doesn't find anything, it's gone. But if he
Not on the cap table yet.
there's no cap table really, right?
No,
It's
but I
just-
think to his point is when he finds the deal, he doesn't get to be on that cap table?
Yes, he
Okay.
does. This is the best part about search. So depending on who I'm answering this question from the investor standpoint, I have a right to a piece of his deal flow. I get to write a check for 10% of his equity check, whatever that ends up being. But I don't have to do it. It's an option, a right, but not an option. I don't have to do all of it. I can take my pro rata, anything up to my pro rata or less.
And then presumably the other investors could fill in if
They could, and once everybody's had as much as they want, then you can bring in gap investors from the outside. And that often happens. And generally they go to the network first. So I'm in my first cohort of searchers. I had 20 Pavels running around trying to find businesses. Switching it around, what's in this for him? He's not an experienced CEO. He doesn't have any money. He's going to pay himself, $100,000 a year, which is presumably a lot less than he was making. But he has walking around money to pay lawyers for failed deals, if that's what happens, and accountants. And so that's what the 2 years. You get $500,000 budget for 2 years. So to use it however you want, but don't pay yourself too much because then there's nothing left. What he also gets is equity. And his equity position is, the beauty of search is there's no negotiation about this really. It's just always the same for everybody. It's almost franchise-like in this sense. Everybody gets the same deal. And it is the best deal in private equity. So for somebody without any CEO experience or any money, you get 8 1/3% of common, not of the preferred, because the initial equity goes in as preferred with a 1x on it, and then the common sits after that in the waterfall. But he gets 8 1/3% of the company in common at closing of the deal that he finds. So if he doesn't find a deal and it doesn't close, he doesn't get anything. But when he finds a deal and he's made CEO, his deal fee is 8 1/3 of common equity vested immediately at closing. Another 8 1/3 vests monthly over 4 years, and another 8 1/3 vests purely based on IRR or MOIC hurdles that start at 20% IRR and end at 35. So it's a smooth rate. So if you deliver a deal with a greater than 35% IRR, you get 25% of the common. It's a freaking great deal, and it's based not purely on performance, but the final third of that is based on performance. There are some small tweaks that happen to that happen, but generally speaking, that's the historic search fund.
So it was really good that you found Explora in 2 months or whatever.
Well, yeah, it was good that I found Explora. The time period didn't really matter. The IRR hurdle actually only starts once you acquire. It doesn't start during your search period.
but it meant you didn't have to spend all the budget.
But I didn't, and I brought that to closing. I mean, I had $400,000 or something left that I brought to closing, because that's expensive capital for the following reason, which I haven't told you yet. That $500,000 of Pavel's gets put on the cap table whether anybody invests or not. So this is, let's say this a couple times. It's put on with a 50% step up. So If he raises $500,000, those investors are going to get $750,000 of space of actual cap table units as their return for that, making that investment. Whatever they choose to invest on top of that's up to them. So sometimes and we've done this once, you'll say, I'm not going to invest in my piece of his deal, but I'll leave my search capital there. It makes a 50% bump at closing, and then I'll just watch it. Generally, people don't do that. Generally, he raises enough money. If I'm not going to write my check for his deal, he takes me out at closing. That's the sort of practical aspect of how it ends up working. Did I answer that
You
question?
did.
And sometimes you need to hear that a few times because there's a bunch of dials turning.
No,
But
it made a lot of sense.
It's all,
It explained how everybody gets something.
it does. And actually the terms over the last 5 years have gotten even better for the searchers.
Interesting.
For reasons
thought they were good enough.
I don't really understand why. And that's a whole other topic. We can spend more time on that.
Any other questions?
A bit off topic, but have you heard about automated wet labs? There was one in West Sac that was, what's it called here? About some land that started recently.
Did you say automated wet labs?
Yeah.
I have not. I'm not surprised, but I've not heard about it. Is it an incubator, or is it?
They're part of YC, the company, but that's the incubator that they're a part of. But I just want to know if you had any thoughts on it, or just still keeping up in the, I guess, pickaxes and shovels
Yeah.
in the biotech space.
So the wet lab space has a bunch of people doing what we call, the space that I got into, vivariums, is largely called fractional infrastructure. That's what this is, fractional infrastructure. You take something that's a high capital, you break it into pieces, and you rent it in shorter periods. And they do that with wet labs. Smart labs is one of the big ones in lab space. And it makes a ton of sense. Like, people who are investing venture capital in a biotech, they don't want you investing in expensive capex if you can avoid it, because you're probably going to be gone in 2 years, 3 years. So I'd rather you invest it on a shorter horizon, spend less cash, and if you make it through 2 years, then we'll do it again. So the rent versus build, the lease versus build, rent versus buy decision is really at the core of fractional infrastructure. And it turns out to be something that I've ended up getting pulled into in different industries. And I'm now deeply involved in another one, which is exactly like Explora. It's just cloud kitchens. They're kitchens are the same thing. They cost just as much as a vivarium to build. The difference is you've got restaurants cooking in your kitchen instead of biotechs raising mice. But the dynamics and the economics and the dials you're turning are all very similar.
What do you think about the Sacramento region as a biotech community? And it's okay to be honest.
I think it's really hard. For the reasons we were talking about, it's all about people. And it's hard in biotech for the same reason it's been hard doing software startups here, because all the center of the center of where all the best people have been has been traditionally down in Silicon Valley and South San Francisco for biotech. There are exceptions, of course. There are people who choose to be up here who are great, and there have been some good successes, but it's always hard. I mean, the same thing exists in San Diego. The people who live up in Solano Beach always say, well, why can't we be up there? And the answer is because Torrey Pines is where it's at, you know? And they're like, yeah, but we have a better quality of life up here, and you don't have to commute. But people keep going back to Torrey Pines. Boston has a similar issue. Kendall Square is where they want to be for biotech. But it makes a lot more sense to be outside where people live. And what I will say, both in San Diego and in Boston for biotech, is that change is starting to happen. People are starting to move actually to fractional infrastructure wet labs that are being put outside of Kendall Square because it's cheaper real estate. and it makes a lot of sense. I think eventually we'll see some changes like that here, but it's just going to be hard. It's just always hard. Your chances are always better wherever the highest density of great people are.
So,
For great, not great people, that's not the right phrase, because that implies that we don't have great people. I mean, skilled, focused talent for the thing you need now. That's
At
what-
scale.
At scale,
In quantity.
in quantity, density of that, right.
yeah, I see like Aggie Square, they're struggling to get people to move.
Yeah. Yes.
What do you think it'll take to get over that hump? Specifically here in Sacramento?
A few successes, I think. Like
Yeah.
anything, you know?
It's like
And-
the Intel model, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Intel
How many
kick,
people out of there
kick-
started something like
absolutely.
I think someone you know, talking about Steve Weiss in MedTech Silicon Valley said this the beehive effect.
Mhm.
And actually, some facilities they may have a plan to expand like this one, but everybody is crammed into a corner of the building until you expand because the energy is high, the
Right,
entropy.
right, entropy.
And I think the problem in Sacramento we have diluted entropy because we have clusters. We don't have a focus.
That's a good answer, yeah. Yeah.
How would you fix it?
Aggie Square?
They're working on, they're working on it with this nightmare of traffic jam.
The Aggie Square has several issues, and I'm not sure that they can fix them. I mean, the parking structure has just one small one is a huge problem.
Mhm.
Well, that's why you guys, Rose Factory had a little bit of a cluster there. So the backyard.
It's also, it's not really startup friendly, it's more like corporate friendly, but not startup friendly.
Aggie Square.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I think Brad's paying like $500 a bench or something.
I have a slightly different model because we have our facility, but like Imatopia next door, for instance, is it's $450 a bench.
Yeah, and they're like 2,000 a bench.
Oh, wow.
So,
20 minutes away. I mean.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So they're not startup friendly.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, if it were easy, Meg would have figured it out 20 years ago.
Well, I mean, I do remember years ago, we had, for a board retreat for the nonprofit SARTA, we had our board members read that book, Startup Communities, from years ago. I mean, this is probably 2012. And the notion that's always stuck with me that was a big topic of the board retreat discussion that day was his assertion that, you know, if you're going to build a thriving startup ecosystem in any given place, you need to get up every morning and think of it as a 20-year proposition. You know, tomorrow it'll be 20 years that I'm going to need to put into this. Next Thursday, it'll be 20 years still that I need to put into this. 5 years from now is still, you know. And so it's sort of, and it stuck with me both because it felt really true, and it really emphasized the length of time it requires to make that kind of meaningful, fundamental change in any given region. And the other piece that I always felt was specific to Sacramento, and maybe to other similar places, is sort of in the ether, and it's entirely intangible. But you know, we are, as we all know, a hugely government dominated town. That does weird things to the size and scale of our business economy relative to the government. But the other thing that I always wondered about was, what does that do to us culturally and to our overall risk appetite and willingness to take the kind of risks that startups require? And I don't mean like, what is my risk appetite, but what in aggregate is our collective community risk appetite? And do we, in aggregate, look differently at startups and at innovation than other places, people in other places do, that don't have, because government is a very risk-averse endeavor.
Yeah.
You know, the
I
other,
mean, nobody wins points in
Right.
government for taking chances.
yeah, you know the other thing that's very risk averse? Agriculture.
True.
And we got a lot,
But for many years, like the ag presence was not really felt in the local business
Really?
community. But anyway, but yes, you're right.
Healthcare's
The ag
also
money is not
That's
in
right.
the economy.
Right.
We know that the big ag money is in New York. It's not here local. It's not reinvested. That's another big problem. Because what we have with high tech is, or we saw with Intel, people are spinning off and they're getting
Right.
their money like
Right.
you're doing, you're reinvesting.
right,
But the ag has not done anything of that to the economy.
yeah.
There used
Other
to
than
be a-
Five Star Bank, right? Didn't they put some money
Which
in
is more
there?
the real estate arm of ag.
That's right, yeah. Yeah.
There used to be, I believe there still is, a faculty member at UC Davis called Martin Kenny, who, again, 150 years ago when I was busy doing this work, he would map startup clusters in different geographies. And he mapped Sacramento, but he started by mapping kind of the big known clusters. And, his big lesson from all of that, and one of the things that his cluster mapping showed really clearly was, as you'd said, the critical importance of people spinning out of successful companies and becoming entrepreneurs on their own, and sort of second and third generation, so to speak, entrepreneurship activity that could all be traced back to the Intels of the world, or to the, name another company.
HP.
Exactly. Or to Apple, elsewhere. And that always, that made a big impression on me. And I think a lot of like Pam Marone, who has been
Yep.
like the poster child in our region for the serial entrepreneur. And there's a number of others as well, but being a Davis person, she's the first to come to mind.
On that thought, has she trained other future founders?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that based on current knowledge,
Yeah.
but she has certainly had some talented members of her leadership team. I'm not sure what choices they've made subsequently.
No, she restarted the band in her latest endeavor.
She does
Pretty much the
something
Yeah, I
same.
mean, she just keeps putting the same people together under her heading. I'm
Right.
not sure she's doing the
The
Intel thing.
expansive thing.
Right? Yeah, the
Right.
second generation, third
Right.
generation stuff.
Right.
Well, on the ag side, what we're missing is the big seed companies. There's not a lot of spin-off. HM Klaus,
Right.
Pioneer,
Yeah.
Syngenta, etc. Nobody knows they are here.
Right.
Unless
Very
you're in the
tightly
business.
held.
Mhm.
So there's not seeding. No pun intended.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is sort of, it's the old rule about the rich get richer, and Silicon Valley continues to benefit from that, and in the biotech world.
Well, it's also
Campbell
interesting
Square.
to premise one begets the other, because,
Right.
both back when I started there a year or so ago, but, Mark Haney, 4 years ago, started the Backyard Advantage and investing in companies that then, those hopefully will,
Right.
beget successful founders that then invest back in the fund, but also invest back into the economy.
Yep.
And that's why 80% of the first fund of the 64 companies are Sacramento. For that, to your point, the 20-year thing, it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
And there are successful exits, and they're investing in the fund too, and they're investing in other companies.
Yeah.
And that's,
Well,
I love it, because what you're saying is exactly the premise, is 20 years. It is, and I'll use the word, it's generational.
Right.
Because it's not going to happen in this generation.
Well, 10 years ago, there was a startup, and they're looking for seed money. I tell them, go to the Bay Area, there's nothing here for you. But now I actually will refer them to the Growth Factory, and, we got Vanessa here coming from the Bay Area, so we're waiting for you to start the next unicorn here.
I think it's also like you said, the proximity to the universities, big universities that have a lot of science, a lot of financial
IP.
knowledge, right? You gotta have the right ecosystem. And so that's what you see in Boston.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really what you see in
And Pavo, being from Sac State, you gotta get moving. Start that startup.
But that's an intriguing question, though, because if you look at the healthcare side, with our big healthcare systems, we have 4 of them here, we have the payers.
But
we
that
have-
is what she's saying, I think, is that it's more like a safety. It's like you don't want to take risk, it's just patient. It's a system that's working, but the entrepreneurs have to take risks. And how do you learn to take risks if you don't have it all, right? Or there's just a few founders that were successful.
Yeah.
And I think also we have the 4 health systems, but really UC Davis is the only intellectual property generator
Absolutely.
Yeah.
of those 4.
Yep.
But those health systems, they need to all have innovation arms where they can invest back in the community.
Or where they're willing to, I mean, SMUD a number of years ago, and probably may still be doing this, but, was quite willing to step up and enable pilot programs.
Exactly.
in
They
a
are.
couple
They are.
of
They're still doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Still are right now.
And they,
Which, if the health systems were to do something similar, it's obviously a very different industry because you're delivering healthcare to human beings, which is, you don't want to.
They do. But Sutter is not doing it locally, it's in the Bay Area.
Mm.
Kaiser is in the Bay Area.
Mhm.
Dignity is in the Bay Area. Carrie and I pitched for Corpus, on their Corpus for a fundraise on the VC fund to Dignity in the Bay Area. And we're in Sacramento. So, but they may be delivering care strongly in our region, but the thinking and the money is not here, except for UC.
Interesting. All right.
So I actually have a question for you.
Yeah.
On your model of search fund, which is relying on the payroll,
Yeah.
what percentage of them are they in this region as opposed to outside the region? So like looking at the greater Sacramento, what's your percentage in the region?
I don't have a single one based in Sacramento. And that's, but they're wildly distributed. They're all over the country. They can be based anywhere. The search fund entrepreneur is not in Silicon Valley or Boston or San Diego generally. They're often in secondary markets because the businesses that they're trying to acquire are generally smaller. They could be anywhere, and they are anywhere. And one of the rules is traditionally the rule has been, if you buy that business, you have to run it and you got to move there, wherever that is.
Right.
And that we would call a nationwide search.
And that's why
And-
you took only a 5% max cap on the cap table, because you don't want to be traveling all the time, you didn't go see us.
To go see them? No, it's, the deal, average equity check for most of these deals is about $10 million. And so you just have to titrate your desire to write a check for each deal, and based on how many you think you're going to be doing.
Another data point, Sac Energy, which was started by Carrie, they do maybe 10% of their deals are in Sacramento.
Okay, is that it? I'm going to adjust my answer a little bit to your question. I heard you ask how many of our searchers are in Sacramento.
Correct.
That was the answer. But there have been a bunch of search acquisitions done here
Okay.
for people who were based elsewhere. They found their business here and moved here. One of them locally, whom you should use, is a great guy, and it's called HR to Go, and he runs a small HR PEO.
Used them myself when I started mine.
He's Corey Stott. He's a great guy running a great business. He's running, basically competing against what used to be Kim Silvers' business, Silvers HR. She has subsequently sold it. But
And Bonnie, Heating and Air.
Bonnie's another one. There's a third, which is there's a compounding pharmacy just north of Sac that was bought. It was a search deal, and then there was a tax accounting firm that was acquired regionally, which was also a search deal. And there's probably been a couple others that I don't know about. There's a number of flavors of search now. It always used to be just what I did, and what I've described to you is called traditional search. Now there is what's called self-funded search as well, where people say, I'm not going to raise outside capital because of that. What do I do with that $500, now $750,000 of expensive capital? I can afford to fund a search myself, I'll find something and then I will go try to find the investors to invest in it. And I get better terms. I keep more of it for myself. That's called self-funded search, and that's exploded. There's a ton of that going on.
Has there been a race to purchase machining companies?
Machining?
Yeah, because there's plenty of talk right now about moving manufacturing back to the U.S.
Yeah.
So has been, yeah.
So I would say there hasn't been a race to, not amongst search cap tables, because it doesn't have that recurring revenue. Maybe it might have good revenue, but it doesn't have contractually recurring revenue. So I would describe the difference between the two. If you're a CEO and you have clients who sign for a year's worth of spending, either through a subscription usually, right? Or you have clients who buy a widget from you whenever they need it. They're very different kinds of businesses to run. This one is what I ran because our contracts for those rooms were recurring revenue. Much easier to run. You get to focus on growing the business rather than getting buried in it. This business, which is what most of machining is, you sell each machine part or each machine service each time. And so you spend a lot more time trying to deliver the quality of the revenue each month or each week or each quarter. Each has a pro and con, but I would say from a search standpoint, no, machining companies are not, there's no race to get them. However, in the world of AI, there's a big push towards things that are AI proof, and machining is one of the ones that would fall into that category. So I think you're going to probably find private equity generally, maybe not people like us, but private equity is probably very interested in machining, particularly when it has a real focus. Aerospace, something that gives it a barrier to entry. That's the challenge. You see, anybody can buy a CNC machine and be a machinist now. You gotta have an edge to be differentiated, at least for us to be interested.
Western Aerospace is a good example because of ITAR requirements, meaning that you can't buy parts overseas,
Right.
so it has to be made.
Yep. We haven't done any machining, but we have done a O&W heat treating company, which heat treats. In other words, they take aerospace machined parts that are going into jet engines. They have to be heat treated by a third party. So they make them, they send them to this company, they put them into a furnace at some temperature, I don't even know what the hell they do. That is third party validated from the outside. And they send it back to them with a stamp on it that says it meets the requirements of the aerospace company now and can be shipped. And we have an investment, one of our searchers bought that kind of business. So that to us made sense because it had very clear barriers to entry, and it had actually contracts. They would sign multi-year contracts with their vendors for product. And that's going really well.
So any more questions? All right, last one.
Yeah, tell me about some of the successful software startups that you know about in Sacramento. If any.
I'm the wrong guy to ask. I don't know.
No, there's.
I'm not saying they're not here. I just don't. I don't
I
know
would say
anything about.
Skyslope is one.
Skyslope.
Yeah, they did real estate. It's like real estate software, and they have. Skyslope, yeah, it's. I think they get sold for like, I don't know, like 200 million or something like that. And
Can I ask a question?
okay.
Do you invest in cloners?
Cloners. You mean-
Software cloners. They clone big, successful.
No, I don't. Typically, I mean, for the most part, we don't do a lot of investing in things we don't understand. Now, I don't know anything about heat treating like we just described, but I can understand how it works. But something like that and a lot of software, I just pass on it. Just did yesterday. One of our searchers found a deal. She described it, she put up the whole thing together, and I read it, and I still don't understand what it does. I'm sure it's a very good business, but I don't understand it, and so we're going to pass.
All right, thanks everyone for.
MedStart.